Brands are human, and humans are rebranding. You don't need to rebrand. You're not a company. You're not a product. You're a girl. At the end of 2025, I decided to start my New Year's resolutions early. These video essays and Substack articles were a big change I wanted to implement in my life. This video essay is inspired by TikTok, which is ironic, and you'll learn why soon. While I was making resolutions, others were calling it something else.
The concept of a 2026 rebrand is crazy to me. You don't need to rebrand. You're not a company. You're not a product. You're a girl. Oh, you want to evolve? Okay, great. You want to evolve intentionally? Have at it. Make a list. Make some goals. Have some resolutions. And before you say that's what a rebrand is, a rebrand is top down. Evolution is inside out. Oh, if you feel like you need to be witnessed and you have to turn your growth into a spectacle, why? You have people for that in your life. And if you don't, that's resolution number 1, is find people so you don't have to turn your own life into content in order to feel seen in your day-to-day. Because the moment that we feel like our own evolution has to fit an aesthetic, you set yourself up for failure. Evolution is messy and it's hard. That's the whole point.
Calling New Year's resolutions a rebrand feels dehumanizing, but also diminishes the changes one wants to make to oneself, alluding that they are only surface level and not that deep. My mind filled with questions. Why are we calling this yearly ritual, a list of goals and changes we wish to see, a rebrand? Will there be repercussions if we change the meaning of a rebrand to apply to humans as well as brands? Will this make brands more human? And if we humans are rebranding, what does that make us? All super casual thoughts during the month of January. Anyways, if evolving oneself is making hard on aesthetic changes from the inside out, Tula's makeover from My Big Fat Greek Wedding is a clear winner, because it's one of the best self-esteem makeovers in media. She didn't do it for a man or anyone else. She did it for herself. Tula thought, quote, "I wish I was braver and prettier or just happy," unquote. This became her goal. She made herself over according to what she felt most comfortable with. Also, it isn't instant. We see her evolve over time. She experiments and learns how to do her makeup and style her curly hair, starts going to college classes, leading her to introduce herself to new people, and learning skills helping her find a new career. Tula's evolution feels organic. Her goal is ultimately to improve her self-esteem, and the bonus is getting a date with the cute guy. How do you rebrand yourself? What does that even look like? Fortunately, a Substack article came up on my homepage called Rebrand Yourself Because You Can by Reed Orchidea. Rebranding starts out similarly to Tula's journey. Discontent with your life or self because, quote, "your whole era feels expired," unquote. The author reassures readers that rebranding is inevitable because, quote, "every version of you has a shelf life," adding, "brands rebrand all the time," unquote. Rebranding appears to be the cyclical optimization of yourself to gain that promotion or new career opportunity. Unlike Tula's makeover, the motivation behind rebranding is clear. Do it to improve your value. Value here is reliant on your productivity, an effect of centering our lives around optimization and consequently monetization. How did we find ourselves trapped in this never-ending capital cycle? Why are we willfully treating ourselves like machines? Silvia Federici's book, Caliban and the Witch, explores the rise of capitalism in correlation to witch hunts and the regulation of bodies. Through the use of social policies influenced by mechanical philosophy, the divide and conquer of the natural world and humankind for the sake of the capitalist economy, the bourgeoisie altered how we view ourselves. No longer coexisting within nature, our bodies now, quote, appeared not only as a beast inert to the stimuli of work, but also as a container of labor power and means of production, the primary work machine, unquote. Severed from the natural world and rebranded as an integral part of the capital one, Silvia explains, quote, "the mechanization of the body justifies the total submission of the individual to the power of the state," unquote. Magic challenged capitalism's need to compartmentalize humans and nature, being an, quote, animistic conception, unquote. There was no room for any separation. And more importantly, Magic imagined everything being in a, quote, sympathetic relation, unquote, to one another. Remember, there is no such thing as an ethical billionaire. Magic authorized an irregular, flexible schedule influenced by the cosmos and the occult forces, challenging a, quote, regularization of labor process, unquote. What's more unsettling? Humans have already been mechanized, or corporations are being humanized. Started as some fun online, the pioneer was whoever was running the Wendy's social media pages. The online banter between some unpaid college intern, my proof, a gut feeling, a vibe, my intuition, and online users seemed genuine and natural at the time. Now every comment section is at risk of an advertisement disguised as an overly generic and superficial comment from some corporation. They're just marketing, you say. It's a crucial part of running a business. At least corporations don't have any legal rights blurring the lines between business and personal rights, right? Wrong. In 2014, the US Supreme Court ruled in Burwell versus Hobby Lobby Stores, Inc., that privately held for-profit corporations are exempt from regulations that their owners religiously object to. However, the Supreme Court did not address whether it was protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution, specifically the free exercise of religious clause. A ruling over a decade ago granted certain corporations a get out of doing anything their owners religiously object to. So these corporations are an extension of the owners, like an arm or a leg? Was this the beginning of corporations legally having equal or more rights than people? If we're rebranding to be productive machines, and corporations are not only advertising like humans, but also gaining legal rights once exclusive to humans, then does that make brands more human and us less human?
Men exploring and pioneering for all to follow. Men endlessly seeking something new along the roads of civilization in the great unknown expanses of applied science and scientific research. All the new highways of research and exploration have brought to us more raw materials, new combinations of raw materials, new and greater productivity of the soil, making more plentiful an ever-widening range of goods.
Technology, innovation, and pop. Let's go all the way back to 1940, to New Horizons, a promotional film by General Motors claiming that highways, and therefore their product cars, would bring a better and greater world of innovation and productivity. However, their understanding of innovation seems reliant on, or a result of, consumerism.
More desires have developed to be satisfied. And with the demand for all of these conveniences and improvements, opportunities for employment of men, money, and materials have increased.
Classic supply and demand. The film is a prelude to consumer culture. The race to innovation after World War II, and soon the USA, pro-capitalist, anti-communist, will have competition, the USSR, anti-capitalist, pro-communist. Merriam-Webster defines innovation as something new or a change made to an already existing product. However, recently, innovation seems to be more about something new and less about improving what we already have. Shannon Kim discusses in their video essay, Art in the AI Bubble, Guns, Fences, and the Farm Crisis, the speculative bubble, and why companies are so quick to invest trillions into AI data centers. Despite low business confidence, OpenAI's CFO on the Wall Street Journal coyly alluding to the possibility of the US government providing subsidies, and now articles are reporting OpenAI will go bankrupt by 2026. Shannon explains companies have, quote, this pressing capitalist urge, unquote, resulting in investing mostly in new future opportunities and ignoring, quote, present contexts that need fixing, unquote. Seems risky, no? Citing speculative communities by Atana Siu, who describes speculation in our financialized world as, quote, elite gambling, unquote, which evolved into a, quote, core social force in binding modern society, unquote. highlighting a pattern where the more uncertainty and instability during historical periods, the more it influenced the elites to join, quote, this collective fantasy, unquote, by sharing wagers on the future. In an online lecture, Consumerism is the Perfection of Slavery, Professor Jiang Shui-Qing describes money as speculative because money creates more money, while workers are productive because they create value. The professor explains how the Reagan Revolution and Thatcherism of the 1980s were really the revolt of the elite. Since society during the 1950s to the 1970s centered around the worker, and therefore was too egalitarian, the elites wanted class inequality to hoard more wealth and power. So transitioned from a worker-centered ideology where the government promised citizens well-paying jobs to a consumer-centered one. Now the government promised citizens a wide selection of cheap goods and ushered in the beginning of neoliberalism and free market capitalism. Why does this matter though? Well, the mentality of the consumer is influenced by consumerism, and, quote, consumerism creates a competition in society for prestige, unquote. Also, it individualizes and optimizes you, leading us to be unable and unwilling to organize and act in solidarity. Whereas the mentality of the worker is quite the opposite. It is necessary that the worker, quote, have political consciousness in order to protect his or her rights, unquote. Solidarity is essential to the worker, because to advocate for these political reforms, workers must be willing to unite and capable of organizing themselves. The professor concludes that the addictive gratification of consumerism enables us to become willingly enslaved in a cyclical need to consume. Quote, if you're a slave, you rebel, but you don't know you're a slave and you like this, you chose this, then you will never rebel. It is a system that achieves what the elites want, and the masses are unwilling and unable to protest and rebel. It's a perfect system, unquote. I continue to define our culture of productivity, innovation, and consumerism as a cyclical cycle, an Ouroboros. Thinking back to Caliban and the Witch, where even back in the Age of Reason, the elites also revolted against the workers to benefit the developing capitalist economy, forcing the worker to conform and, quote, overcome our natural state by breaking the barriers of nature and by lengthening the working day beyond the limits set by the sun, unquote. The capital Ouroboros continues. In 2017, Netflix chief executive Reed Hastings complained, quote, we're competing with sleep, unquote. Even though he recognizes, quote, you get addicted to it, you stay up late at night, unquote. Then describing the several hours we consumers are sleeping as, quote, a very large pool of time, unquote. Also, how we consume trends is cyclical, and going analog and physical media are at risk of becoming another trend. Content creator What Zara Loves warns, quote, the way we consume it will determine whether it does just get treated like a trend that we overconsume and then discard, or not, unquote. So either a culture shift, actually engaging with the media we buy, consciously consuming and building a collection of secondhand media we have already discarded over the past decades, or it becomes just another trend, and we allow corporations to capitalize on us buying new and probably cheaply made, over-consuming so much physical media in a short period of time, similarly to how we consume digital media. Except for the newly made physical media, it is physical, and if mass discarded will physically pollute our physical land. Is the rapid creation to keep up with our consumption or vice versa? Do we overconsume to keep up with the vast quantity of goods? It's a little discouraging, the thought that we're trapped to eternally consume and discard.
You can roughly locate any community in the world, somewhere along a scale running all the way from democracy to despotism. One to the democracy end, another somewhere in the middle, and a third. Let's find out about despotism. This man makes it his job to study these things.
Well, for one thing, avoid the comfortable idea that the mere form of government can of itself safeguard a nation against despotism. Germany, under President Hindenburg, was a republic. And yet in this republic, an aggressive despotism took root and flourished under Adolf Hitler.
Democracy to Technocracy. A year after World War II ended, Encyclopedia Britannica released an educational film detailing the descent from democracy to despotism, meaning a way of ruling in which the leader has total, unchecked power. The film explains how, quote, restricted respect and concentrated power, unquote, within a country or community are influenced by the economic conditions and the accessibility to information. Meaning, the larger the difference between economic classes, specifically the upper and lower classes, the shrinking of the middle class, leads to despotism. Also, when the public has restricted access to information and is expected to accept what little information is available. Quote, when the press, radio, and other channels of communication are controlled by only a few people, unquote. The film was in response to the rise of the Nazi Party in 1930s Germany. But present-day despotism might have a new appearance we aren't familiar with. Yanis Varoufakis has a theory that capitalism is dead, killed by its own hand, and in its place a new system, much more sinister but nothing new to us humans. He calls it techno-feudalism. This new system, unlike traditional capitalism, doesn't produce products for profit, but, quote, it is a produced means of behavioral modification, unquote, stating we train this machine to train us, to train it to tell us what we want, and then the machine sells it to us. He calls this new capital cloud capital. Quote, cloud capital grabs our attention, it manufactures our desires, it sells to us directly outside any traditional markets, that which is going to satiate the desires it made us have. It drives proletarian labor inside the workplaces, and it elicits massive free labor from us. It's cloud serfs, unquote. The behavioral modification optimizes our doomscrolling and our spending, rebranding our free labor to not only be voluntary, but also a necessary tool to function within our society. Online shopping doesn't need traditional markets to function. Yanis continues saying how Jeff Bezos, unlike past capitalists, doesn't own or produce products. He owns a panopticon-like algorithm, meaning Bezos, similarly to feudal lords, has complete control over what products we, the cloud serfs, see available to purchase. Therefore, sellers are compelled to work within Bezos' online market, and their products are subject to his algorithm. Quote, maximizing his cloud rent, unquote, is a rebranded version of ground rent, used by feudal lords to profit off their vassals, sellers, and peasants, buyers. The bourgeoisie, described in Caliban and the Witch, threaten violence and prosecution against defiant workers with, quote, the introduction of bloody laws against vagabonds intended to bind workers to the jobs imposed on them, as once the serfs had been bound to the land, unquote. Unfortunately, I think the elite learnt from their predecessors. Less stick, more carrot. We were lulled into consumerism, our dependency on efficiency, overnight shipping, and anything and everything at our fingertips. If techno-feudalism is too far-fetched a pill to swallow, technocracy is a more grounded ideology. Technocracy developed during the Great Depression in the USA and is a form of government run by technical experts. Policies are made based on objective methodology and not the opinions of the constituents. You can see why the ideology is popular amongst big tech CEOs. Elon Musk's maternal grandfather was in the technocracy party in Canada for some time and even went to jail for his involvement, as reported by CBC News. One of the main goals of technocracy is the formation of the Technate of America, the American expansion of its territory into neighboring nations, including Canada, Greenland, the Panama Canal, Colombia, Mexico, Cuba, and of course, Venezuela. All sovereign states a certain president has threatened to annex and invade. Is this why big tech CEOs appear to be financing politicians and lobbying for aggressive threats of war? Is this Trump's motivation, his reasoning, influenced by the very tech bros who funded his 2024 presidential run? Is it just for minerals or for a new ruling class? Meet the main tech bro, the only one who was supportive of Trump during his 2016 presidential run and who helped fund J.D. Vance's political career, Peter Thiel. Somehow more likely to be a lizard person than Zuckerberg, and so unbelievably moist. Volksgeist reports the Antichrist is here when deep diving into Thiel's life, his philosophies, and his surveillance machine, Palantir. Firstly, Thiel's philosophies, self-published in the Straussian Moment, show Thiel's motivations to replace democracy, not fix it. The American constitutional system, with its checks and balances intended to protect freedoms, is now a barrier to progress. Unsurprisingly, Thiel wants to be in charge. Detailing in another self-published essay the education of a libertarian, writing, quote, "The fate of our world may depend on the effort of a single person who builds or propagates the machinery of freedom to make the world safe for capitalism," unquote. This explains Thiel's friendship with the creator of the Dark Enlightenment movement, Curtis Yarvin, who in 2025 did an interview with CNN sharing his ideologies and his goal of replacing American democracy with a CEO-led monarchy. Yarvin says, quote, "You could probably put any of the Fortune 500 CEOs in the White House and say, okay, you're in charge of the executive branch, fix this. And they'd probably do fine. They wouldn't be Hitler or Stalin," unquote. I have nothing nice or pleasant to say about Yarvin, a man who looks exactly how his name sounds. Onto Thiel's creation, Palantir, named after the seeing stones from Lord of the Rings that Saruman uses to communicate with the Dark Lord Sauron. Try not to worry because it does live up to its name. Software is described as, quote, "the combination of every analytical tool that could ever exist," unquote. Corporations, police departments, and every three-lettered agency in the Western world are using Palantir to help digest unfathomable amounts of data, consequently making spying and law enforcement effortlessly accurate, and Palantir one of the most powerful corporations in the world. Predictive policing, once a dystopian plot in movies, such as 2002's Minority Report, is now a deeply rooted system being used by multiple countries and a subject of TikTok edits. One in particular by @JFK went AFK stating, quote, "You are now less valuable than the data you produce," unquote. Which reminded me of a passage from Byung-Chul Han's book, Psychopolitics, claiming that we are in fact farming ourselves for data for big tech. Quote, "The auto-exploiting subject carries around its own labor camp. Here it is perpetrator and victim at one and the same time. As a self-illuminating, self-surveilling subject, it bears its own internal panopticon within. Here, there is no difference between guard and inmate. Digitalized, networked subject is a panopticon of itself. This ensures that each and every person has now taken on the task of conducting perpetual auto-surveillance." Fate of the chronically online. Big tech bros and dark enlightenment minions clearly see themselves as the new ruling class. But who will be the new underclass? Obviously the already vulnerable, the unhoused, those with substance alcohol use disorder, the chronically ill or disabled, the, quote, socially disposable, unquote. In a mid-2000s video game, Dreamfall: The Longest Journey, one of the main antagonists is the corporation Wattie Corp, inventors of the Dreamer console, a virtual dreaming machine that links the user's subconscious and Wattie Corp's dream store with the use of a hallucinogenic additive called Morpheus. The game never specifies which element, the dreams or the drug, is the addictive one, but an unhoused NPC hooked up to the dream console can be seen in-game, reflecting reports from the Government of Canada that, quote, substance use was the most commonly cited reason for housing loss, unquote, and that individuals, quote, substance use increases with the time spent homeless, unquote. Also, in-game, there is a scientific article discussing the possible correlation between, quote, the recent increase in violent crime, mental illness, and social apathy, unquote, and the technology of dream consoles. Additionally, listing symptoms of, quote, dream sickness, unquote, ranging anywhere from, quote, a decreased ability to tell waking life from dreams, unquote, to serious mental illnesses. Predictive policing dictating which communities to patrol, our value being dependent on how much data we produce, and back to Caliban and the Witch, detailing the severing of us humans and nature. If the elite view humans as separate from animals and themselves as superior to us, have the elites, the intellectuals, hypothesized which creatures deserve empathy or sympathy? One of my favorite books I read during university was The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, a horrific tale of a scientist without ethics or limitations, as well as a look into the ethics of animal testing in the name of scientific discovery, the opinion that civilized man felt more physical pain than those, animal and human, inferior to him. Believing animals felt little to no pain was the leading justification behind vivisection and enabled believers to feel no guilt for the animals. In Wells's book, his protagonist Edward's reaction to the crying of the puma demonstrates this ideology. As the doctor experiments on the puma, Edward notes, quote, the cries were singularly irritating, and they grew in depth and intensity as the afternoon wore on, unquote. He attempts to dull the noise by placing his fingers in his ears, but is forced to leave the compound, opting to take a leisurely stroll. Edward's opinion of the puma in pain are more of annoyance, referring to them as, quote, dumb. However, later on as Edward is eating, the cries of pain are different, and so is his reaction. Quote, after a long pause, I resumed my meal, but with my ears still vigilant. Presently, I heard something else, very faint and low. I sat as if frozen in my attitude. Though it was faint and low, it moved me more profoundly than all that I had hitherto heard of the abominations behind the wall. There was no mistake this time in the quality of the dim, broken sounds, no doubt at all of their source, for it was groaning, broken by sobs and gasps of anguish. It was no brute this time, it was a human being in torment. As I realized this, I rose, and in 3 steps had crossed the room, seized the handle of the door into the yard, and flung it open before me, unquote. In H.G. Wells's own essay, Popular Feeling and the Advancement of Science, Anti-Vivisection, he explains that a hierarchy of feeling physical pain is because, quote, emotional states are anesthetic, unquote. Savages feel less physical pain than civilized people. Women feel less physical pain than men. Quote, a furious man, unquote, uncivilized, feels less physical pain than civilized men, and animals feel less physical pain than humans. Claiming women, savages, and, quote, furious men are highly emotional creatures, unlike the civilized man. Wells continues stating, women are more mentally sensitive, but when physically in pain, women, quote, display a silent fortitude quite impossible to ordinary men. Their pains are more intense mentally, but less so physically, unquote. In opposition, Frances Power Cobbe, a women's rights and anti-vivisection activist, quote, saw a clear connection between feminism and anti-vivisection, unquote. Remember the characteristics of despotism? Quote, restricted respect and concentrated power, unquote. The unfortunate opinion of civilized man viewing both animals and women as lower animals echoes the restriction of respect seen in falling democracies. Now we see anyone can fall into inferiority, and aren't we everyday people closer to homelessness than the billionaires some admire and defend? An online user called Magic, at your girl DJ Magic, explains their, quote, digital pollution theory, unquote, in a video titled The Chronically Online Will Become the New Underclass, comparing the social media's polluted landscape to the exploitation of marginalized communities' land by the US government for the industrial capitalism. I highly recommend you go watch the entire video, since I'll be focusing on their theory in the 4th section. quote, "The future of a contaminated digital environment is one where privilege determines who gets to log off," unquote. Magic asks, if it's possible for digital spaces to be polluted, can they also be colonized, zoned, and gentrified, causing alternatives to being online, going analog, to be, quote, "only available to those who have the time, the proximity, the privilege, and the money," unquote. Referring back to the unhoused Dream console user in Dreamfall, are we closer to a reality where governments will cite online dependency as the leading cause of homelessness? Magic states, quote, "There will be a class of people who have to be online out of necessity due to geographical isolation, economic uncertainty, or lack of access. I believe that the online class could potentially become a lower class of people, maybe building out the idea of a digital caste system," unquote. A digital caste system would normalize why the chronically online are characterized as lower class. Magic references the pillars of caste and occupational hierarchy, noting marginalized people, specifically African Americans, were seen as lower class citizens and forced into lower status labor. I've already discussed how consumerism has altered our culture, and in a capitalist society, one's job indicates one's place in society. What about content creators? Magic theorizes, quote, "If the digital environment is polluted and unsafe, and only the privileged have a means to opt out, then those who must stay and work within it, whether as users or creators, end up holding undesirable roles. They will end up having dirty jobs. This automatically places them into a lower caste within the digital hierarchy," unquote. These are my thoughts, my suspicions of why we are rebranding. Thank you for listening.